Welcome to the D6 Family Ministry Podcast, a place where ideas, principles, and personalities come together to give you a ministry advantage that empowers the church and home.
I don't know anything more important in our society or in the kingdom of God than to help the church, help the family.
Discipleship is not an event, it's a way of life.
And one day it just hit me that discipleship at home was not about doing more. It was about inviting Christ into what we were already doing.
The goal of family ministry is not families sitting on the couch holding hands and singing Kumbaya. The ultimate goal is families that love God, love people, and make disciples of all peoples.
So that's why you're here. You're here to say 1 hour a week, as significant and as awesome as it is, we know that it's not enough and we want to be intentional with every hour.
You're listening to the D6 Podcast. Here are your hosts, Marianne Howard, Ron Hunter, and Josh Wooten.
Welcome, everybody. We are so glad to have you, Josh. Marianne, it's great to have you. It's funny, I almost went Josh and Lena because it just naturally rolls off the tongue. I often do that whenever you have association names. So Marianne, it's good to see you. Good to see you too, Josh. You know, we've been in this pandemic for, longer than any of us have wanted to, and we're going to be interviewing Jim Putman, who is without a doubt one of the leading voices on the topic of discipleship as recognized by other pastors today, his writings, his example, what he's been able to do. He's got a pretty sizable church. And Josh, you were pointing out that Jim said this about himself, that they are a big church of 6,000 with 600 small churches within it. So the question that we wanted to ask of our listeners and ask each other today was, what have we done to keep creativity in this online community that we've been on? And I will quickly say to you that I was really creative for the first 4 or 5 weeks, and then it gets hard after 4 or 5 weeks. And I'm scared that if I don't get my answer in early, Josh is going to shame me with his creative and online abilities in here. But what have you guys done to make these online small groups creative and fun and not lecture driven?
You're right, Ron. It seemed to be a lot easier to do within the first month of this, but there are only so many scavenger hunts you can play.
Well, thank you for taking my only creative moment
here.
I'm sorry. No, it's good. It's good.
We were all doing the same things. We would really utilizing. Is it Jack something?
Jackbox.
Jackbox. Yes, we did a lot of Jackbox games, and it was fun. It was fun, and we eventually moved from that. At least for our youth group, we decided to do an interactive YouTube night where we just basically did like a kind of a talk show with games, and we would have them vote on specific things, and we would show up and give prizes to somebody's house, Chick-fil-A or something like that. And it was more, I wouldn't want to say entertainment driven, but that was the carrot to get our youth group to show up. And then we would have short 10-minute messages with them engaging in the comments of YouTube.
I think that's great. I think this is from a little bit of a different perspective, but my closest friend, my closest heart friend that is one of my knives because she keeps me sharp, lives in Africa. And so digitally, we were having to connect creatively before the pandemic. And so I know that we're all beat down by it, but at the end of the day, I think we've got to be intentional, and it is going to be somewhat of a norm. It's going to be a new norm, I think, from here on out. The digital world is evolving as we speak. And so I think shorter, intentional times together online can break up the monotony of just online craziness. So like, hey, we're going to have coffee. And it's going to be from this time to this time. We're just going to have coffee, and I'm going to have some coffee questions. Like, we're sitting at a restaurant, but we're having a cup of coffee. What do you like in your coffee? What are your goals? Just trying to be creative. One of the other things that happened with my community group was we got really creative with meeting needs. So if somebody couldn't find Lysol wipes, it was like, I'm going to find Lysol wipes in this town. And we would drop things off at people's doors. And so that's another great way to build community amongst your small group or amongst your students. What are some needs? Who can't find something? And now we're going to go out there and try to meet those needs. And so we were always sharing, I can't find Lysol wipes, or I can't find this, or I can't find that. We go out there and find them and then deliver them. And another thing that became kind of neat in our area for children's ministry, peeps, is chalk blessing people's driveway and their sidewalk, where you go and write scriptures and words of encouragement on their driveway and on their sidewalk, even if it's in your neighborhood. But it's a creative way to connect with your neighbors and your neighborhood. So those are some of the, outside of the digital craziness, those were some of the ways we tried to be creative.
Those are good. Those are really good. And yes, I did the scavenger hunt. You're spot on there, Josh. And I actually had some fun times with it. We did it with our entire team at Randall House on a couple of occasions. Then I told them, I said, hey, I wanted some insight from other leaders about a new game, and asked them. They're like, no, I think everybody loves the scavenger hunt. So I did it a third time, but I called it quits after three. The thing I've tried to do with our small group is a couple of other creative items is people miss face-to-face. And it's not just face-to-face, but it's the ability to be vulnerable and honest. So sometimes I think we just need to create questions for them. And so when we get into a group, whether it's 10 or 12 or, it's 30, and my life group can fluctuate between those numbers easily. And I must confess, in some of this, it's dropped below those numbers, because, the people are fatigued with it. But, if you have that group 10, 12, or up to 30, most onlines allow you to divide them into small groups in this small group. And so I just led a meeting the other day where we did have about 30, 35 of us together. And I sent them questions ahead of time to everybody. And I said, I'm going to randomly divide you into groups of 4 or 5. Everybody already has the questions. Appoint a leader and just start asking. And so the types of questions I would ask is, what's been the best movie you've watched recently online, or TV binge watching that you've watched, whether it's Netflix or Amazon Prime? What's one thing you found scarce other than toilet paper that surprised you in the pandemic? And they get to share these kinds of questions.
Dr. Pepper. Dr. Pepper.
You know what? My wife wanted a sewing machine back in April, and you couldn't find one. And it's taken me until the middle of August to be able to find a sewing machine for her in our area. And so ultimately, we're doing these fun questions like, name one thing on your bucket list you hope to check off one day. Those typical types of icebreaker questions, but you want to lead them into the more serious. What's one Bible passage that you have found that has been so encouraging during this period of time? And then you get into prayer time. And I think that helps fill those areas. I think that the creativeness has forced all of us to be a little more techie than we normally would be. And I'm generally a bit techie on these areas. I'm an early adopter of technology, but I've learned how to pair or mirror my iPad, because I like to draw when I teach and whenever I talk. And so now I can pair my iPad and I can actually draw, and it creates a whiteboard on the screen that looks just like a whiteboard in the classroom. And so that's been my creativity. It's not been, the over-the-top things I know other people are capable of doing, but it's trying to fit my own talents into these opportunities, which is creating conversation and drawings and stick people. I'm really good at stick people, for where we are. But we have to be creative and take that moment and expand on it. And I think our guest today is going to help us to do exactly that. This is a guy that has taken the topic of discipleship, which has been around since the beginning of time, not since Jesus issued the Great Commission, not since he issued the Great Command, but since the beginning of time when Adam and Eve was told to be fruitful and multiply God's image to the coming generations. And he has taken it to another level of creativity. But it's not like over the top, like, wow, whiz bang. It's over the top. Wow, that's a unique perspective. And it's very doable for other churches. And so I want us to just kind of pause and listen to what Jim Putman is going to share when we come back from this commercial break.
Are you looking for a way to equip families to do discipleship in their own homes? D6 Everyday offers a new at-home bundle option so you can reach families where they are. The same great D6 Everyday resources now bundled to fit your family. D6 Everyday at-home bundles are a great way to promote discipleship at home, especially during COVID-19 restrictions. Many churches and small groups are not gathering for worship or discipleship training, but you can resource them with teaching helps for the parents and devotion magazines for every member of the family, or about the cost of a Chick-fil-A meal. For more information, visit d6everyday.com.
All right, hey everybody, our guest today is Jim Putman. He's the co-founder and senior pastor of Real Life Ministries in Post Falls, Idaho. He holds degrees from Boise State. Oh, they got good football.
They do.
Have you seen the blue field?
Oh, yeah, been on it, played it, yep.
Wow. Wait, you played?
Well, in high school, we got to play on that field.
That is
but
cool.
I wrestled in college there.
Okay, I'm sorry. I know that we're in an interview, but is it weird to play on the blue field?
It is a little bit weird.
You up?
It is a little bit weird.
We need to talk about that later. I won't bore everybody else, but that's interesting to me. I'm a football fan, obviously. Boise Bible College, he was there as well. He's the author of 3 books, Church is a Team Sport, Real Life Discipleship, and The Power of Together. He's the co-author also of Discipleship and Hope for the Prodigal. Jim's passion is discipleship through small groups, and he and his wife have 3 sons, 3 daughters-in-law, and 5 grandchildren.
Yeah.
We just had to update your bio because you
did.
just had, congratulations, you just had a new granddaughter.
Yeah.
So you're here teaching a session, helping us deal with the epidemic of young adults leaving the church with no desire to return to faith after that they were raised in. Such a huge topic. And not enough people talking about it, so thank you for doing that. Can you give us some highlights of the seminar? We're not going to be able to attend it, obviously, so give us a cheat sheet.
Well, first of all, the book that we wrote, my dad and I, on Hope for the Prodigal, deals with the story, obviously, of Jesus telling the story of the prodigal sons. And in the seminar, I'll talk a little bit about first defining what a prodigal is, because I think there should be a lot more people worried than are, or concerned than are. Because when you think about a prodigal, you think about maybe a drug-addicted kid, maybe a kid who is living immorally, and that's true. But that story is the story of one prodigal who left and one prodigal who stayed. Neither of them had the heart of God. And there are a lot of parents that aren't too concerned about their kids because they have a good job, they're married, they have 2 cars, a nice house, and they don't think of them as prodigals. But anyone who is not absolutely committed to the Lord Jesus and serving Him and is a disciple and a disciple maker, in that sense, is a prodigal. And so trying to even the playing field a little bit, because there are some parents that feel really bad, and then there's some parents that don't feel one bit bad because their definition of success wasn't somebody absolutely committed to Jesus. And so just defining what we're talking about first is important, and then just walking through what are the steps you take once that happens. But the whole first part of the book is on really what does it look like to build a home that's hard to leave? And so we'll talk about, in the main session that I'm going to do, I'm going to talk about what does it look like to have a church that's hard to leave but easy to come back to.
I want to hear more about that. What does that look like? What is a church that's hard to leave and easy to come back to? What does that look like?
It looks like a church that's actually making disciples as Jesus defines it. If a church... one of the things I really believe is that the devil's really good at allowing us to keep our words but changing the meanings of those words. Like love, rather than an act of the will to lay down your life for another, it's a feeling you have, attraction, it's intense lust, it's those things. So we get to keep the word, but the definition is inaccurate, and when you don't have the right definitions for the words, those words lose their power. Same thing for the church. There's a lot of people that think they're going to church, they would call the building they attend a church, but biblically it's not a church. When you think about the mission of the church. I think somehow we have come up with, in America, the mission of the church is to make converts rather than disciples. And so what does it look like to be a disciple-making church with the right definition of spiritual maturity? Spiritual maturity is not just a person who knows the word. It's not just a person who's gifted. It's not just a person who follows rules. Jesus said, all the law and the prophets hang on two commands, love God and love others. Paul said, you can know all mysteries, speak in the tongues of angels and of men, but if you have not love, you're nothing, you're a resounding gong. So I think spiritual maturity, if you misdefine it, then the church loses its power. People aren't stable. They leave a church because they didn't get the music that they liked. A pastor leaves a church because he got to step up to a larger church. You've got people who don't really know each other. They go to church, but they aren't the church. They don't support each other. They don't love each other. And relationships are like ropes. The more relationships you have, the harder it is to leave a place. And the reason that it's so easy for kids to leave, and even for that matter, parents to leave one church to go to another, is that they really don't have connections, deep relationships. They haven't worked through conflict, done life together, support each other. So it's easy to pull up roots. The roots aren't very deep. And if maturity in Christ is just that you know the facts and you can recognize good doctrine, and then you can leave. And so if we raise our kids in a discipleship with spiritual maturity culture really defined well and lived out, real relationship happens. And it's hard to leave when you know you are loved, when you know those people, when they know you, when they've been to your games, when you went camping with them, when they've had deep conversations at 2 a.m. with you, when they were there for you when you were struggling and you felt capable of sharing that you were struggling. When people are known and loved, it's hard to leave. But Christianity has become a theory. It's become a set of beliefs rather than deep, abiding relationship with Jesus and real relationship with others. And when that happens, you not only don't reach lost people, but you don't keep the ones you got. So,
how do you apply size to what you're saying? I mean, I can see what you're saying happening a little more naturally in a smaller setting. Is it possible for it to happen in a larger setting, or is there a cap to having that kind of church?
Well, our church is well over 6,000 people. And so, we have to work really hard. We can't make people do anything, but every weekend service, everything we do is to push them to that next step of real relationship. When somebody gets saved, we talk about you understand that you're not a convert, you're a disciple, and we baptize people that come to know Jesus, but we're like, hey, if you're not ready to become a disciple, then I'm not going to baptize you. And so here's a disciple. A disciple is somebody who's deciding to follow Jesus. They're deciding to leave the old life behind. Baptism is a picture of dying and being raised to walk in a new life, but it's also a picture of a new birth into a family. And so you've got a family. And oftentimes most of our decisions came from people in a life group sharing their faith together and ministering to the needs of people, or people sharing their faith and then bringing them. So they came to know Christ in a life group, in a relationship. So we're asking them to continue that. And so you come to the church on the weekend, but we're going to push you. Success for us is not how many attend, it's how many move to the next step of relationship, where they're now in a community of believers, where there's intentional leaders investing in the younger spiritual believers, and there's real relationship happening there. And so it's a big church with 600 little churches inside of it. And so the families do life together. The single moms know they have a support group. I get to take their kids hunting. I get to have hard conversations with them and support them. People in the life group do that for each other. And so everything goes to that direction.
Hey, we're going to take a quick break. After the break, I want to revisit your book, Hope for the Prodigal, and talk a little bit more about what prodigal looks like and what parents who have a prodigal child what they can do about that. So after the break, we'll talk more with Jim Putman, and he is the author of Hope for the Prodigal and Real Life Discipleship and Power Together and all of these things. And we'll talk more with Jim right after the break.
Are you seeking clarity in your vision for family ministry? Randall House Publishing has brought together 15 ministry experts to provide a resource that offers practical ways to measure and adjust every aspect of ministry. Recalibrate, a new measure for family ministry, is one of our best-selling family ministry titles. The book covers topics including cultural challenges, staff and volunteer dynamics, meaningful conversations, prodigals, and many more. The 15 contributors bring to the table their depth of ministry experience as they offer guidance in children's ministry, youth ministry, churched kids with unchurched parents, marriage ministry, and the art of family conversations, along with several other categories. Let these experts give you a clearer vision for the future of your ministry. Visit d6family.com today to order your copy of Recalibrate. All royalties from the sale of this publication go to support D6 International.
Hey, everybody, welcome back. We're talking to Jim Putman. And Jim, we were talking about your book, Hope for the Prodigal. You brought, I want to make sure everybody caught it earlier in our time together. You brought kind of an interesting viewpoint that there weren't just one prodigal in that story that Jesus told. The parable, there were two. Just one was away and one was at home, but both had a heart away from God. Kind of a cool perspective on that passage. And you had mentioned that parents need to be aware, and obviously parents are concerned when their kids are in that prodigal stage. I work with a lot of parents, though, that just feel hopeless in that moment. You were kind of going between parents who care and don't care. I want to talk about the parents who do care but feel hopeless. Can you give us some encouragement that ministers can give to those parents of what they can do in those moments? Because obviously, as a parent, we can't control our kids' hearts.
Right.
So what can we do? I mean, I understand pray, but is there anything else?
Yeah, let me just reiterate one thing. I think in both cases, parents care. Whether they just don't see the one that stayed at home as a prodigal because they were around.
Fair enough. Sorry about that.
So yeah, they do care. They just don't have God's eyes to go, wait a minute, just because they're around doesn't mean they actually love.
Yeah.
The story, Hope for the Prodigal, is really built around my father, who was a prodigal for different reasons. I was a prodigal. I was an atheist and an alcoholic. And my son was a drug addict who ended up living in a homeless shelter because we had to leave him there. And now he's in ministry. He's a youth pastor, but it's really built around what we learned in our own experience. I'll be honest with you. I haven't drank in 30-some years, but the closest I ever came since that time is my oldest son and drug addiction in jail. And our church was, thousands and thousands and thousands of people, and I could care less. Who cares if you win the whole world and you lose your own family? I mean, I loved the people, I cared, but my wife and I were broken-hearted. Yeah. And when you discover you have a prodigal, oftentimes we get angry, disappointed. I felt all those things. I was angry at God. I felt like he let me down because I had tried so hard to do the things that wouldn't lead to a prodigal, because I had been a prodigal. I wished that my dad had done certain things. I took the things he did well. I tried to incorporate the things he didn't, and I really focused on my kids and tried to keep boundaries and all those things, and it didn't work. And so I was really angry at God. I felt like he let me down, and I was angry at my wife because we couldn't get on the same page. I was angry at my son. And I remember I wrote my resignation because I had, on a Saturday night, my son had come home high, and I knocked him out cold because he got in my wife's face and said things, and I'd had enough. And I wrote my resignation, and I went in to the church to give it, and they said, "We're not taking your resignation." What do you mean? You've been there with us when we've struggled. You're struggling. You're just going to step back. And I just said, I'm not right. I'm not right within myself. There's no excuse to do what I did. My wife and I are on the same page. I had to confess that to them, and they said, "We'll help." And my son's prodigalism, if you want to call it that, exposed me. And I realized that I had believed some things about God. I had formalized some things. If you do the right thing, you get the right thing. I'd forgotten there's 3 parts of every equation. There's my part, God's part, and my son's part. God isn't going to take my son's free will away from him just because I wanted him and did my best to raise him in the Lord. And I had to work through a lot of those things. And again, I was exposed. I was angry. I was frustrated. And so the first thing I had to do is go, okay, I got to be firmly on the rock. A drowning man can't save a drowning man. In my mind, I felt like my son was out drowning, and I was being pulled off of the rock and trying to save him, but a drowning man can't save a drowning man. And my wife and I were on that same rock together. So it really exposed us. And we had to go, okay, what are we going to do? We're going to be honest. We're going to get counseling. We're going to get on the same page. We're going to forgive each other. We're going to work on this together. We're going to set boundaries instead of my wife was enabling and I was trying to control. What does that look like? We couldn't see it for the forest for the trees because we were so much in pain. And so we had to get in the right order. And then we had to go, okay, wait a minute. We're leaving our kids that are doing well off by themselves because all of our energy is going over here. This is stealing from them. And we needed counsel to figure all this out. And so the hope is this. If you are going through those kinds of experiences, it's okay. Don't isolate. The devil will tell you you'll lose your credibility if you admit that you're struggling. People will judge you. They'll use scripture like if you can't take care of your own house, you can't take care of the house of the Lord, and they'll shoot their wounded. The nice thing about our church is by making disciples who loved each other, that wasn't the experience we had. These people walked beside. I wouldn't be in ministry if it wasn't for the way they treated us. And they helped us get on the rock as a family. And then when my son's world came crashing down around him, he had something to come back to. Versus if we'd have lost our faith and quit and been shot, by our church and all that, he wouldn't have seen that much difference in where he was and where I was. But because we had a church family that loved us and supported us, and we were able to be honest and work through our things without the shame and isolation that the devil tries to block us off into, we made it. And that gave our son something to see that was different than what he had. And then, setting the boundaries so that here's what we're going to accept, but I want you to know, son, I love you. No matter what you do. You can't come live with us. We're not going to rescue you. But we love you, and you can never go too far that we won't love you, and you'll never go so far away that Jesus can't take you right where you are. But when you're ready to hit bottom, and there's some evidence of that, we're going to be there. And so there is hope. But I think the first thing you have to do, it's a simple analogy. I know it's overused probably, but when you get on a plane, they always talk about if there's loss of pressure in the cabin, don't try to put the mask on your kid first. Put it on you first, because you'll pass out in the middle of putting it on them and you both die. You put it on you first. And you and your wife, if you're married, get together. Single mom. That's the importance of a church, that really does relationship. A single mom usually is by herself trying to do all of this but not if you're in a life group, not if you have real believers around you. Now it's a support system you have. You're not alone. You may be single, but you're not alone. And you do it together. And as a result of that, God keeps you firm, keeps you hoping rather than hopeless, keeps you hanging in there rather than trying to escape with your own form of sin of some kind. And in my case, it took a long time, a lot of prayer, a lot of damage was done. I have a child. My son has a child from out of wedlock, and he's my oldest grandson, and what a blessing he is. My son made a mistake, but that grandchild is not a mistake. We have a relationship with the mother who's remarried and who is married, and there's a consequences that he still has to live with, but he doesn't have to do it alone. And one of those consequences isn't a loss of relationship with God anymore, and it's not a loss of relationship with his family. And so it's been quite a ride.
What an incredible story. Wow. Hey, thank you for being with us. I want to also make mention, we didn't get to dive into this, but your book, Real Life Discipleship, is a real guide for churches on how to create the kind of church you're describing. Yeah. And I want to make sure people know about that and get a chance to go check that out. Thank you for being with us at D6. Thanks for being a part of the podcast. If you guys want to know more about what Jim is doing, you can follow him at jimputnam.com. And again, really appreciate you being with us.
You bet.
To be honest, this is just one of the most unique perspectives of discipleship that I've heard. This has been one of my favorite podcasts. It has really left me challenged and convicted, and helping me evaluate my own home. I have not seen the prodigals in quite the way that he brought about the prodigals, and just we forget about the prodigal that's at home. I think there's been so much emphasis biblically on the prodigal that leaves and is just openly, I'm walking away because that's my choice, that we forget about the compliant rule follower in our house that's not walking with God, and to be aware of those in our ministry. Just helping, we're walking alongside families. And so having discernment to navigate and help them see the prodigal that may be walking away physically, and then the prodigal that stays. Two of the things that he said that I absolutely love, Mr. Jim, this is so good. Build a home that's hard to leave, and build a church that's hard to leave and easy to come back to. Yeah. Whoa. Sir.
Yeah. And he said in that people don't leave churches, they don't leave relationships. It's the relationships that will keep them when the church disappoints them.
Yes, he uses the connection ropes as his explanation point of when they feel known and seen and loved. Yes. They feel connected and valued.
Yes.
That is so simple, but so rich.
Yes.
And even the story of his son, and the lows, the valleys, because that's when the meaningfulness is built in these relationships. I mean, sure, it's great to celebrate the highs with one another, but, there's a reason where, these bonds occur with, Ron, this within the military community. Because these guys have gone to war together. They have been in the trenches. They have been, looking death in the face together in literal senses, and sometimes in many cases, just like he and his family with his son and what they went through. But the fact that they love them through that time, and that's where those meaningful relationships are built. They'll ride or die. That's what people are looking for, are those type of relationships. And so often, as the reputation of the church has been, that they shoot their own wounded, they get them out of there when things don't look the way that they think they should look. And I love the transparency of which he shares his story in that, and his family as a leader of the church. And I have a pretty solid reason to think that that's probably why his church does so well within the small group, because it is modeled from the top down that it's okay to not be okay. We're going to walk with you through that.
I absolutely echo what you're saying, Josh. That was my favorite part through this. Sometimes when we speak of prodigalness, we tend to think only about the prodigal. And Mary Ann brought up the quiet one still at home. But I was also moved by another part that Jim said on this. He said this was his words: "My son's prodigalism exposed me." Mm-hmm. And he talked about his reactions, both good and bad. And he literally laid his soul vulnerable to us in sharing that story of how he reacted properly, how he was ready to resign, went in and offered his resignation. And this tells you what a great leader, because he had already developed his team around him and he developed his church, and they looked back at him and says, "Hold it, you've walked us through the tough times. Now it's our turn to walk you through this time." I had tears rolling down my face listening to that. That just, I want to get Jim back to D6 and have him unpack that story in a lot more depth, because I feel like he ran through it a little bit quickly here. And if it touched us all at such a deep level going quickly, imagine what it'd be like if he slowed down and unpacked this for our audience.
And the power in his son seeing the way the church loved his parents and not discounting them, and like Marianne said, that is what made that church easy for his son to come back to when it was time, when he was at the end of himself.
Can I tell you some of the most powerful words that my mentor has spoken into me about this very subject is, she said, it's so simple, but she says, Marianne, it's our job to love and it's God's job to change. And I just want to challenge the parents listening this week, or any of the ministry leaders, but I specifically want to encourage the parents of prodigals, whatever prodigal you may be dealing with in your home. If that's what you're living right now, I want to encourage you. It's your job to love. It's God's job to change. He is truly a God who changes hearts and moves hearts toward himself. So please don't get discouraged. He knows the way, and you love them, and he will change them.
And what you're saying, Marianne, is very relational. Jim said this too. He goes, hope does not exist in isolation. Right. Therefore, it is about relationships. It's about that love. It's about that encouragement. When people think that they are fully isolated, been abandoned, been left alone, nobody cares, that's when they want to give up. That's when bad decisions are compounded upon bad decisions. Right. And we, as the body of Christ, we as family must provide and give and live hope in ways that shows those loves, shows those behaviors, shows those connections. I was blown away. This had a lot of content for such a short period of time that our listeners got a chance to hear Jim, and we're very blessed to have had him. Any final thoughts before we wrap up here, guys?
I just think, like Andy Stanley says this, he says, circles are better than rows. I think that the early church looks a lot more like small groups in a living room than a bunch of people in an auditorium on Sunday mornings. And I think we're getting back, when we do that right and do it well, I believe that is God's, design for what his community is to look like in that.
Great thought there, Josh. Love that. I agree. The small group, that quote from Andy Stanley, really good. Next week, we're going to have on the D6 podcast, Michelle White, and we look forward to having you back with us. And until then, we're praying for you to have heartfelt connections due to conversations and God moments that become teachable in ways that are unexpected for you this week in a wonderful way. We're praying for you. We're praying for your ministry, both at church and home. Till next week, we'll see you then.
You've been listening to the D6 Podcast. You can learn more about D6 at d6family.com.